My parents skipped my MIT graduation to watch my sister's ballet recital. They didn't know that was also the day I cut them out of my life. When my cousin's wedding forced us into the same room 5 years later, they finally faced what they'd lost. The morning of my graduation felt like any other, filled with the anticipation of something monumental. The campus was buzzing with energy, a mixture of nerves and excitement hanging in the air. I stood off to the side, in a quiet corner of the campus, adjusting the zipper on my cap and gown, trying not to look for anyone in the crowd. My phone stayed silent, as it had for days. "We'll see you there, sweetheart," my mom had texted me the night before, her words casual, like any other message. But there were no calls, no confirmation. I had learned not to expect much from them by now. Still, I saved 3 seats in the middle of the row, a habit I couldn't quite break. The ceremony began. I walked across the stage, feeling the weight of the moment settle on my shoulders. My smile felt practiced, a reflection in the mirror I had prepared that morning. But it didn't reach my eyes. As I shook the dean's hand, the applause that followed felt distant, hollow. My family wasn't there to cheer me on. I had always been the strong one, the one who didn't need attention. At least, that's what they told me. But in that moment, walking away from the stage, the empty chairs beside me felt like an echo, a constant reminder of what I had been missing. I couldn't bring myself to look at my phone until after the ceremony. When I finally did, I saw a message from my mom. "Sweetheart, Mara's recital time changed. We just couldn't miss it. She was breathtaking tonight. You would have loved it. How did it go?" I scrolled through the photos she had attached. Mara, glowing in a pale pink costume, her cheeks flushed with glitter. My mom's face beamed beside her. I lingered on the images longer than I should have, letting the reality of what I was seeing sink in. My parents had made their choice. It wasn't just about this one moment. It was everything. All the years they had missed my achievements, all the birthdays they forgot. I was the one who always did what was expected, never demanding, always quietly in the background, never the one who needed to be seen. It felt like that's exactly what they wanted. I thought back to the times I had tried to make them proud. I tried to be the perfect son, the one who didn't need coddling or attention, the one who would always be fine. And yet, it never seemed enough. They always found something, or someone, more important than me. I didn't call them back that night. Instead, I sat on a bench beneath a tree, the warm breeze brushing against my skin. I let it cool the sting in my eyes. Around me, families hugged, laughed, and took photos. I didn't envy them. I simply saw the difference between their reality and mine. The emptiness I felt wasn't something I could fill. The decision came quietly, like a clean break forming in the silence. I was done. For the first time, I truly understood what it meant to cut them out of my life. Not with anger or resentment, but with a quiet, solid certainty that I couldn't keep holding on to something that wasn't there. I blocked their numbers, their emails, and the group chat that had never included me anyway. I didn't expect them to understand. I didn't even know if I could. But it was the first real choice I had made for myself in years. 5 years had passed since I'd cut my parents out of my life. In that time, I had built a new world for myself. One where I could breathe, where I didn't have to shrink for anyone to shine. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I'd moved to Seattle for a job in tech. It wasn't glamorous, but it was fulfilling. The work was challenging, and the people I worked with were sharp, passionate, and, most importantly, unburdened by the weight of family expectations. I spent most of my days with my head buried in research, pushing myself to innovate, to create something that felt meaningful. But when I wasn't working, I noticed the silence in my apartment. It was a small place, a studio with barely enough room for my bed and desk. But the windows faced the city, and the view, though small, was my own. There were nights when the city skyline stretched out beneath the dark sky, and I could feel the calm settle in my chest, the noise of the past fading away. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I had made the choice to sever ties, to step away from my family, but that didn't mean it was easy. There were days when I felt the absence of their approval, the hole that had been left by their neglect. Some nights, when the silence felt too loud, I would wonder if I had made the right decision. If the weight of that choice was too much to bear. Jessica noticed it. She was my best friend in Seattle, the one person who had managed to break through the walls I'd built. Confident, ambitious, and always ready with a dry joke or sarcastic comment, she was everything I wasn't. And somehow, that made her the perfect counterbalance to my guarded nature. She wasn't afraid to call me out when I was being too withdrawn, when I was hiding behind my work or pretending to be fine. "You know, you've got to stop running from everything, Aidan," she told me one afternoon. We were sitting in a small cafe near my apartment, sipping on coffee that tasted like bitter regret. "You can't keep burying yourself in work and expecting it to fix things. You're not a machine, you know." I looked at her, my mind racing. She was right in a way. The constant pressure, the endless hours spent on projects that no one else seemed to care about. It was starting to feel like a distraction. But that was the point, wasn't it? If I kept myself busy, kept my mind focused on something else, I wouldn't have to face what was really bothering me. I said, but I knew even as I said it, it wasn't true. Jessica didn't let it go. You're not fine. You're avoiding something. You're scared of something, and you don't even know it. You can't hide forever. She leaned forward, her eyes serious. Maybe you need to face what happened with your family. The words hit harder than I expected. I shifted in my seat, suddenly uncomfortable. The last thing I wanted to do was think about them, about the people who had never really seen me. But the truth was, Jessica had a point. I'd built a life here, but I hadn't really dealt with the emotional fallout from that decision. I hadn't healed. So, I did what I always did, I buried myself in work. It was easier. But even the quiet hum of my apartment, the sound of the rain tapping against the window on sleepless nights, couldn't drown out the thoughts that kept creeping in. My phone sat on the table, taunting me with its silence. There were days when I thought about reaching out, just to see if anyone would pick up. Just to hear something, anything, that resembled care. But I never did. I didn't need them anymore, that's what I kept telling myself. But the truth was, I wasn't sure anymore. In the midst of all the work and the distractions, I couldn't escape the truth that had been lurking just beneath the surface. I had cut them out, yes. But had I really healed? Had I really moved on? Or had I just created a new version of myself that was easier to live with? A version that didn't need anyone to truly see him. And that's when it happened. The wedding invitation arrived. It was from Daniel, my cousin, the one person in the family who had never made me feel small. He was getting married, and despite everything that had happened, he wanted me there. I hadn't heard from him in years, not since I'd cut my parents off. But this was different. He wrote a short note on the bottom of the card. It would mean a lot if you came. I stared at the card for what felt like an eternity. There was a part of me that wanted to throw it away, to ignore the past and keep moving forward. But another part, a quieter, steadier part, knew that this was my chance. Not to fix things with my parents, but to see them again, to stand in the same room with them, and see if I still felt small. I hadn't made my decision yet. But for the first time in years, I knew I couldn't keep running. I'll go, I said to myself, the words feeling foreign but true. I wasn't doing it for them. I was doing it for me. I stared at the wedding invitation for longer than I should have, the words on the card blurring as my thoughts swirled. It was simple, no frills, just Daniel's name and the details of the event. I hadn't seen him in years, not since I'd made the decision to cut ties with the rest of the family. But somehow, his invitation felt like a bridge, a tentative reach across the gap that had widened over the years. It would mean a lot if you came. The words stuck in my throat. I'd spent so much time convincing myself that I didn't need anyone from my past to be part of my future. I had built a life for myself in Seattle, far from the noise and the shadows of my parents' neglect. But despite everything, a part of me still ached to be seen. Not by them, not by my parents, who had missed so much, but by someone who understood what it was like to feel invisible. I decided, then, to go. Not because I thought I could fix anything with them, but because I had to see for myself how far I had come. Could I really stand in the same room with my parents, and not feel like the forgotten one? The one who was always second to Sarah. Could I face them without shrinking? Without longing for something I knew I would never get? When the day arrived, the sky in Seattle was as gray as I felt. The city's usual rain had taken a break, but the heavy clouds still hung low, as if the world itself knew what I was about to face. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my suit jacket. I looked good. I wasn't doing this for anyone else, but still, I wanted to look like the man I had worked so hard to become. The one who wasn't defined by what others thought of him. The wedding was held at a venue just outside of Seattle, on a hill overlooking a lake. It looked beautiful from the pictures in the invitation, but the closer I got, the more I realized it was a far cry from the simplicity I had imagined. White columns framed the entrance, roses lined the walkways, and guests milled around like pieces on a chessboard. I couldn't help but feel a little out of place, like an intruder in a world I had never really been a part of. I parked my car in the gravel lot, and took a deep breath before stepping out. The air smelled faintly of fresh flowers and earth. It wasn't unpleasant, but it wasn't comforting either. I could already feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me. What if this was a mistake? What if walking into this room meant opening old wounds I wasn't ready to heal? I walked through the entrance, the sound of voices and laughter filling the air. A small live band played in the corner, adding to the hum of excitement that filled the space. For a moment, I felt like I was in the wrong place. The people here were part of a life I had left behind, a life that no longer fit me. But then, as I scanned the room, I saw Daniel. When our eyes met, his face lit up. He stood there for a moment, as if unsure whether to come toward me. But then he broke into a smile and made his way across the room. "You came," he said, pulling me into a hug. It was the kind of embrace that felt real, the kind I hadn't had in years. "Of course I did," I murmured. His hug was solid, a grounding presence, and for a second, I felt a flicker of warmth. He squeezed my shoulder before stepping back. "I'm proud of you, Aidan. You've come a long way." It was simple, but the words hit harder than I expected. In that moment, I realized how much I had longed for someone, anyone, to say those words to me, to acknowledge what I had done without comparing me to someone else. "Thanks, Daniel," I said, forcing a smile as I turned away. I needed space. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate the gesture, but standing in a room full of people who had no idea who I really was, it felt like I was floating on the outside, looking in. I didn't belong here. Not yet. I wandered toward the far side of the room, away from the cluster of familiar faces. There I saw them, my parents. My heart tightened in my chest as I spotted them standing by the back window. My mom was adjusting Sarah's hair, even though it didn't need adjusting. It was a small, almost intimate gesture, but it made the air feel heavier. Sarah was in a pale lavender dress, her curls perfectly pinned back with tiny pearls. She looked older, less wide-eyed than before, but still, she carried that same careful presence, the one that made everyone pay attention to her without even trying. My dad hovered next to them, his posture a little smaller than I remembered, his stomach fuller. 5 years had settled into their faces in ways I didn't expect. There were new lines on my mom's face, a wariness I hadn't seen before. And my dad, who had always seemed so sure of himself, now looked uncertain, anxious even. But none of that mattered. Not really. I turned away quickly, before they could spot me. For the next hour, I moved through the crowd, engaging in polite small talk with Daniel's friends, sipping champagne and laughing at their jokes. But every time I glanced toward my parents, I felt the old ache, the same feeling that had followed me for years. They hadn't changed. Not really. And neither had I. At least, that's what I thought until the moment came. I felt it before I saw her, the shift in the air, the sudden weight behind me. I turned slowly, and there she was. My mom, standing a few feet away, her hand pressed to her chest, like she needed something to steady her. "My God, it really is you," she said, her voice soft, almost shaky. I didn't move. "Huh, Mom," I replied quietly. She blinked, her eyes wide with shock, not quite tears, not quite joy, just disbelief. "We didn't know you'd be here," she said, stepping forward, her voice a little too loud now, like she was trying to bridge a gap that had grown too wide. "Irreversible to Daniel," I said, my voice steady, calm, though my heart was beating faster now. My dad stepped forward, his voice rougher than I remembered. "You look different." "It's been 5 years," I replied, the words coming out more easily than I expected. Behind them, Sarah hovered, twisting the strap of her clutch, her eyes flicking between us, unsure of where to place herself in this moment. She didn't look at me directly, but I could feel the weight of her gaze, trying to gauge the emotional temperature of the room. Mom forced a smile, but it faltered. "We tried to reach out, we emailed, we called." "I know," I said, my voice softer than it had been. I didn't answer. The words settled in the air between us, and for a moment, the noise of the room seemed to fade as I stood there, feeling the weight of the years pressing in. Finally, I spoke again. "You skipped my MIT graduation." Mom blinked, taken aback. "We explained. Mara's recital." "You skipped a lot of things," I said quietly. The room seemed to hold its breath, as I listed the moments they had missed: birthdays, awards, the things that mattered to me, but never seemed to matter to them. The words felt heavy, each one sinking into the silence between us. Sarah flinched. My dad's shoulders stiffened, but nothing changed. "Not yet. I never asked for that car," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know," I said, my voice softening just for her. "This isn't about you." My mother stepped forward, her eyes glassy. "We thought you were strong. You always were. Mira needed more attention." "That's the story you told yourselves," I said quietly. "But I was a child too. A child who needed parents." The words hung in the air. The room had gone silent, save for the soft murmurs from the other guests, who glanced over, unsure of what was happening. But I didn't care. This wasn't a spectacle. This was my reckoning. And in that moment, I realized that it wasn't just about their mistakes. It was about me finally seeing myself as someone who didn't need their validation. I watched them, standing there like statues, processing the words I had just spoken. My parents, the ones who had raised me, had never truly seen me, not as the person I had become, but as the one they needed me to be. They had always seen me as strong, as the one who didn't need attention, the one who could handle anything. But now, standing before them, I realized something crucial. I wasn't just a reflection of what they wanted. I was a person in my own right, and I had always been waiting for them to see that. My mother's face was pale, her mouth trembling as she fought to hold back tears. "Do you understand how much you hurt us?" she asked, the words coming out as a whisper. It was the question that had always been lurking beneath the surface, the one that I could never answer, because how could you explain the years of invisible pain to someone who refused to acknowledge it? "I understand," I said, my voice steady. "But it's not just about me being hurt. It's about you choosing someone else every single time, without even realizing it." There was a long pause, a thick silence hanging in the air, and then my father spoke, his voice rough, like he hadn't used it in years. "We were doing what we thought was best," he said, though the words felt hollow now, like they were a defense against the truth. I shook my head. "You thought you were doing what was best, but you weren't. Not for me." I glanced at Sarah, standing behind them, her expression conflicted. She had never known anything different, had she? She was the one who was always the center of attention, the one who got the accolades and the praise. And I was the one who learned to accept the silence, to live in the background, to hide my needs behind the mask of independence. "I didn't ask for that car, Mom," Sarah said, almost inaudibly. "I didn't want it. I didn't even know what it meant." I looked at her then, seeing the weight of it in her eyes. She had always been the chosen one, but in that moment, I could see that she, too, was carrying the burden of being constantly compared, constantly placed in the spotlight. She had felt it too, even if she hadn't understood it the way I had. "I know," I said softly. "This isn't about you, Sarah." She looked up at me then, her face softening, her eyes flickering with something like understanding. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a crack in the armor. Mom stepped closer, her hand reaching out as though trying to bridge the gap between us. "We thought you were strong," she said. "You always were." Mira needed more attention. "That's the story you told yourselves," I said quietly. "But I was a child too, a child who needed parents, just like Mira did." There was a shift in the room, the air thick with everything that had been left unsaid for years. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was just exhausted. I had spent so much time hoping for something from them, waiting for the moment they would see me, waiting for them to turn around and acknowledge me, but that moment never came. And in that moment, I realized that I no longer needed them to see me. "Not anymore. You lost me over a mistake," my father said, his voice cracking. It was the first time I had heard him sound vulnerable, but it was too late. The damage had been done long ago, and no apology could erase it now. I replied, shaking my head. "You lost me slowly. Every small dismissal, every time you chose someone else without even noticing. I'm not angry, I'm just done." The room was silent, save for the faint murmurs from the other guests, who had been watching from the sidelines. But I didn't care. This wasn't for them. This was for me. For the first time in years, I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders. This wasn't about making them apologize or regret their choices. It was about me, finally, letting go of the need for them to be something they never were. Sarah wiped her eyes, her face a mix of confusion and hurt. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice small. I didn't reply right away. What was there to say? The apology wasn't what I needed, and I didn't know if I could accept it anyway, but I knew something now that I hadn't known before. "I'm not here for apologies," I said softly. "I'm here for Daniel. That's all." My mother's voice trembled. "Will we ever fix this?" I looked at her, my gaze steady. "Some things aren't meant to be fixed," I said. "They're meant to be understood." There was nothing else to say, no more explanations, no more trying to make them understand. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was a good kind of heavy. A kind that meant the past was finally, irrevocably behind me. I took a step back then, allowing them the space they had never given me. The moment had passed, and in its wake, I felt lighter. Not healed, not whole, but closer to understanding the person I had become, the person I had fought so hard to be. And when I turned away, I didn't look back. After the confrontation, I retreated into the crowd, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion settle over me. I didn't want to be in the same room with them anymore. The weight of years of silence, of hurt, had lifted just enough that I could breathe again. But there was no satisfaction in it. No victory. It was just the truth, spoken plainly, and that was all I needed now. I found a quiet corner of the venue, far enough from the clinking glasses and light chatter, and I sat down. My mind was racing, but my body felt heavy, as though it was still catching up with the moment. It wasn't anger that I felt, or even sadness, it was finality. I was done. But even in the quiet, I could feel their presence behind me. My mother's soft, hesitant steps, the weight of her words still hanging in the air. She came over eventually, her face pale, her movements slow and unsure, like she didn't know what to say, or how to make it right. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She paused, almost waiting for a response, but I couldn't give her one. What could I say? "Then why did you?" I replied, my words cool but not cruel. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't going to apologize for what I had said. I couldn't apologize for speaking the truth. I was done trying to be the one to fix things, to bear the burden of their choices. My mother's face crumpled. The facade she'd carefully maintained for so long starting to crack. I saw the years of regret in her eyes, but it wasn't enough. It was too little, too late. Why now? I asked quietly. Why are you trying to fix something that's been broken for so long? She opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. It wasn't because she didn't know what to say. It was because she knew that nothing could undo the damage. Nothing could change the fact that she had chosen Mira over me, every single time. I don't know if you can, I continued, my voice steady. But I'm not coming back to be the son you lost. I'm not your second chance. She didn't respond. She didn't have to. I could see the truth settling in, the understanding that what had been broken couldn't be fixed with a few heartfelt words, or a desperate apology. It wasn't about fixing it. It was about acknowledging what had happened, the way it had shaped me, and accepting that I had to let go. For the first time, I saw her for who she was, not the mother I had always wanted, but the woman she had become. A woman who was too lost in her own choices to see the damage they caused. I stood up then, the weight of the moment heavy on my chest, but lighter than it had ever been before. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was just free. Free of the need to have them see me, free of the expectation that their love would somehow fill the void that had been left when they chose everyone else but me. I didn't look back when I walked away. The finality of it felt like a release, a liberation from the weight of my past. From the years I had spent waiting for something that would never come. It wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't about making them understand. It was about me, finally standing on my own and realizing that I didn't need them to validate my worth anymore. In that moment, I was done with the past, and ready to move forward. But the real breakthrough came later, when I received a call from my father. The phone buzzed in my pocket, and I stared at the screen. It was his number. I hesitated. I could ignore it, pretend like I hadn't seen it. But something told me to answer, so I did. Aidan, he said, his voice tentative, as though unsure of the ground beneath him. We've been reading about your work. The patents, the projects, everything you've built. We never realized how much you had done. You've built a life without us. There was a long pause, and I could hear him take a breath, as though gathering the words that had been sitting on his chest for years. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. We thought you were fine, that you didn't need us. But we were wrong. We lost you. I closed my eyes as I listened to him, the weight of his words sinking in. For the first time, I could hear the truth in his voice, the regret that hadn't been there before. But it didn't change anything. The damage had been done, and no amount of apologies could fix it. You lost me slowly, I said quietly. Every time you chose someone else. Every time you thought I would be fine, that I didn't need anything. I don't need anything from you now. There was a long silence on the other end, and I could feel the weight of what I had said, settling between us. Your mother, she cried all night, he said finally. She wants to undo what we can't undo. You can't fix 22 years in one call. I said calmly. I know, and maybe you're right. Maybe some things aren't meant to be fixed. Will we hear from you again? He asked, his voice small, almost pleading. Maybe. I replied. Maybe not. And I hung up the phone. The silence that followed, not heavy, but peaceful. It wasn't anger that filled the space, but clarity. I wasn't waiting for them anymore. I wasn't waiting for them to see me or to apologize. I had already moved on. I went back to Seattle later that evening, watching the coastline fade beneath the clouds. The city lights greeted me when I arrived home, steady and familiar. My cat, Tesla, curled around my ankles as I walked in, purring loudly, as if to welcome me back. Daniel texted me a picture from the wedding, thanking me again for showing up. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that I didn't need anything more. I had built my life, and it was mine. I didn't need to ask for permission. I didn't need validation. I was enough. The days after the wedding were strange, quiet. It felt like something had shifted within me, something deep and irreversible. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of my past hanging over me, but it wasn't peace, not exact. It was something else, something like acceptance, like finally understanding that I had done everything I could, and now, the rest of it was out of my hands. I kept thinking about that phone call with my father. His words still echoed in my mind, not with anger or resentment, but with a kind of sadness I wasn't used to hearing from him. We lost you, he had said. I couldn't help but wonder if that realization was enough to make him change, to make them change. But I knew better. No amount of regret could undo what had been done. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't going to let them back in. Not now, not after everything. The closure I had been searching for was never going to come from them. It had to come from me, from the choices I made, from the boundaries I had finally set for myself. I wasn't waiting for their validation anymore. And that was the biggest shift of all. The quiet of my apartment in Seattle had a different feel now. It was no longer just a place to hide or distract myself. It was home. It was mine. I was building a life I could be proud of, a life that didn't need the approval of anyone else, especially not those who had never truly seen me. Jessica called me a few days after the wedding. She didn't ask how I was doing, she didn't need to. She knew. "How's it feel?" she asked, her voice casual, as though she had been expecting this moment for a long time. I paused for a moment. "It feels final," I said slowly. But not in a bad way, just done. There was a soft chuckle on the other end. "Good. You deserve that. To be done with it." I let out a breath, feeling the weight of her words sink in. I did deserve it. I had spent so much time trying to make things right, trying to find some way to heal wounds that had been left open for far too long. But now, I understood that healing didn't always come with a grand resolution or a perfect ending. Sometimes, it came in the form of simply letting go. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," I told her. "About not running anymore. And I'm still not sure what comes next. But I know I'm not running. Not from them, not from anyone. Not anymore." Jessica was quiet for a beat before she spoke again, her voice softer now, almost proud. "You've always been stronger than you think, Aidan. You're just starting to see it." That hit harder than I expected. The truth was, I had always thought of myself as the strong one, the one who didn't need anyone, the one who could keep going no matter what. But I had never understood what true strength was until now. True strength wasn't about being unbreakable. It was about being vulnerable enough to stand tall in the face of what you feared most, and I had been afraid for so long. Afraid to confront my family, afraid to admit that their absence had hurt me more than I could ever say. But now, I was ready to move forward, not as someone trying to fix the past, but as someone who had accepted it. A few days later, I got a message from Daniel. It was a picture from the wedding, just a simple shot of him and his new wife, smiling, surrounded by family. And at the bottom, he had written, "I'm really glad you came." I stared at the message for a long time. It was a small thing, just a picture, but it meant more to me than I could explain. It wasn't about fixing anything with my parents. It wasn't even about making up for the years we'd lost. It was about knowing that someone had seen me, that someone had understood. I sent him a quick reply. "I'm glad I came too." And just like that, I realized that I didn't need to fix everything. I didn't need to go back to the past to find peace. I had already built a future, one that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. I had spent so long trying to be what they wanted me to be, trying to fit into a mold they had created for me. But now, I was free to be myself. That night, I sat on my small balcony, looking out over the city skyline. The lights from the buildings below flickered in the distance, and the hum of the city felt comforting, familiar. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't waiting for anyone to see me. I was simply living. And that was enough. It was all enough, and I knew deep down, that no matter what came next, I would be okay. I woke up the morning after the wedding with a familiar feeling of exhaustion. It wasn't the kind of tiredness that came from physical effort or lack of sleep. No, it was the quiet kind of fatigue. The kind that settled in your bones after an emotional battle, after facing truths you'd been avoiding for years. I had thought I'd feel lighter, like the act of standing up to my parents would lift the weight I'd carried for so long. And in some ways, it did. But there was also a realization that hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I had finally spoken my truth, but there was no closure to be had. Not from them. Not from anyone. I had made my peace with that. But that didn't mean it didn't sting. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the screen. It was a message from my dad. I hesitated before opening it. "Aidan, I know you've changed your number. I needed to say something. Please, just read this." I sat up in bed, the weight of the message already pressing on my chest. I hadn't expected this, not after everything that had happened. But there it was, an unexpected invitation to revisit a past I'd worked so hard to leave behind. I opened the message. "I saw your work in the news. Your patents, your team, everything you've built. I just wanted you to know how proud we are of you. I know we've made a lot of mistakes. I don't expect you to forgive us, but I need you to know we see you now. We always have in our own way." I read it again, the words swirling in my mind. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to brush it off, to let the silence continue. But another part of me, the part that still carried the hope that things could somehow be different, felt a tug, a faint glimmer of something that had been buried deep inside. It wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't even about reconciliation. It was about the reality that had always been there, one that I had avoided for so long. I sat there for a while, staring at the screen. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure of what to say. The truth was, I didn't know if I could ever forgive them, not for the years of neglect, not for the way they had made me feel like an afterthought in my own family. But I also knew that holding on to the past, keeping that anger close, wasn't going to help me move forward. I had let go of the expectation that they would ever change. What mattered now was me. I typed out a response, slowly, carefully. I don't know if I'll ever be able to come back, but I've built a life without you. I don't need your approval to keep moving forward. I'm okay, Dad. I'm really okay. I didn't expect a reply, but a few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Thank you, he wrote. For everything. That was it. It wasn't a grand gesture, and it wasn't a promise of change. But it was something. It was enough for me to close that chapter, to finally feel like I wasn't carrying the weight of their neglect anymore. I put my phone down and stood up. The morning light streamed through the window, the soft glow of the sun casting long shadows across the floor. It was a new day, a new beginning. For the first time, I felt like I was moving forward, not because of what had happened, but because I had finally decided to stop looking back. I had been running from my past for so long, afraid of what it might mean to face it. But now, I was standing tall in the life I had built. Not just surviving, but thriving. I walked to the window and looked out over the city, the skyline stretching out before me like an endless horizon. It was a reminder that the future was wide open, that there were still so many possibilities ahead. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with that. I had finally learned to stop waiting for them to see me. Because I could see myself now. I could stand on my own, and that was enough. The days after the call from my father were quiet. It wasn't the kind of peace I had imagined. It wasn't the resolution I had expected. Instead, it felt like the calm after a storm. The kind that comes when you've let go of everything you've been holding on to for far too long. I woke up the next morning feeling the weight of everything that had happened. But for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel heavy. It wasn't gone, not entirely. But I had accepted that it didn't have to define me anymore. The city outside my window was starting to wake up, the soft hum of life returning. It was a reminder that the world kept moving, even when everything else felt stuck. I had spent so much time waiting for someone to acknowledge me, to recognize my worth. But the truth was, the only person who needed to see me for who I was me. I stepped outside, the cool morning air brushing against my skin. I had learned that sometimes, healing wasn't about fixing everything. It wasn't about making things right or asking for apologies that would never come. Healing was about taking the pieces of your life, all the messy, broken parts, and finding a way to make them work for you. I spent the next few days focusing on my work, something that had always been a refuge for me. I had created something for myself here in Seattle, and it was mine. No one could take that away. But there was something else now, something I hadn't expected, a feeling of openness. A feeling that, even though my past was still a part of me, I didn't need to carry it with me anymore. Jessica called again, and this time, the conversation was different. There was no pressure, no expectations. Just two friends talking, sharing their lives. She asked me how things were going, and for the first time, I answered honestly. It's going well, I said, my voice steady. Finally. I could hear the smile in her voice. I'm glad. You deserve that, Aidan. You've been through enough. It was simple, but those words meant more than I could say. A few weeks later, I received another message from my father. It was brief, just a few words, but it felt significant. I'm proud of you, always have been. I stared at the message for a long time. The words weren't what I had expected. They weren't a grand gesture or a plea for reconciliation. They were just acknowledgement. And in that moment, I realized that was all I had ever needed. It wasn't about their love or approval. It was about me learning to love myself, to understand that I didn't need anyone else's validation to feel whole. I didn't respond to the message. I didn't need to. The closure I had been searching for wasn't something I could get from them. It had always been within me. The next day, I went for a walk around the city, letting the rhythm of the streets settle into my bones. I walked without a destination, just letting the world pass by. I could feel the space I had created for myself, the freedom that came with letting go of the past. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly moving forward. Not just with my work, but with my life. I wasn't running from anything anymore. I wasn't waiting for anyone to see me. I was just living, fully and complete. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the city, I realized something. I didn't need to go back. I didn't need to fix things with my parents or anyone else. I had already built a life I could be proud of, a life that was mine, and no one could take that away. I had learned, finally, that peace wasn't something you found when you fixed everything. It was something you built when you learned to let go, when you learned to stop waiting for the past to change, and started living in the present. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free of the past, free of the expectations, free to be me, and that was enough.